like to invite Lynne Mitchell and Heylighen to come up. Okay, and they're presenting together, so I can introduce them together. And Heylighen, am I pronouncing that right?
That's okay.
It's okay. From the University of Leuven in Belgium, where she leads research design, an interdisciplinary team of architects, designers, industrial engineers, sociologists, anthropologists, and historians, which sounds an interesting bunch to me. And also Lynne Mitchell, who is professor at the University of at the University of Warwick, and Lynne co-founded the WISE, which is the Wellbeing in Sustainable Environments Group, formerly at Oxford Brookes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the introduction. Do I need to hold the mic? Yes, I need to hold the mic. Okay. Thank you for the introduction. Thank you also for the invitation to participate in this event. Lynne and I never met before this morning, but we nevertheless made a presentation together, so I'm curious to hear what you think of it. Before we start, I come from Belgium. We have 3 official languages in Belgium, and English is not one of them. So I apologize in advance for maybe using strange words or pronunciations or whatever. Now you know why that is the case. So our assignment for the presentation consisted of 3 words: dementia, design and outdoor spaces. And with these 3 words we composed the title of our presentation, being "What can designers of outdoor spaces learn from people with dementia?" And the message we want to bring today is that people with dementia develop environmental coping strategies and make adaptations in their environment, and that these actually can be considered as a potential source of design knowledge when we are talking about designing environment and memory-friendly neighborhoods or other spaces for that matter. And in substantiating this message, we also try to make a link between the home and the local neighborhood, because we think that ensuring that both are memory-friendly is actually essential. And how do we do that? Well, we combine insights from 2 studies. We'll start with a case study that was recently done in my research group. A case study based on a woman whom I will call Mary for this presentation. She's in her 40s and she was diagnosed with early onset dementia. And Iris, a PhD student in my team, was able to visit Mary several times to interview her and also to observe her home environment. And we also got access to poems and short stories which Mary writes about her situation with dementia. And in the interviews, but also in the poems and the stories, Mary often refers to the notion of mist. Mist, on the one hand, as a metaphor for the process of letting go, because since she has dementia, several things have disappeared from her life. Her job, her colleagues, driving a car, doing things independently. She had to let go of all these things. But she also refers to mist almost literally to express that she loses contact with her environment. And as a result of this losing contact, she experiences her environment in a different way, but also herself. And she says that sometimes the mist seems to come so close that she almost loses the notion of her own body, and she describes it as that she almost becomes a dust particle that can fly away and disappear, just like so many other things in her life disappear. But despite this mist, there is a little world, or there are a few little worlds with which Mary still has contact. And holding on to these little worlds is her way of trying to remain present. And how does she do this? On the one hand, by claiming several spots and objects in the house as hers. For example, in the kitchen, she has her cabinet with her cup, her cornflakes and her glass. They are always in the same spot and nobody else can touch them. At the dining table she has her chair, and in the seating area she has her armchair with her pillows, her blankets, her coffee table and her candy, and she cannot stand that somebody else, even her husband, sits in her chair or eats from her candy, although she knows very well that it's ridiculous. But that's her part of her strategy to remain present. Another part of her strategy is that in these spots that she claims as hers, that she organizes them in such a way that they make life easier on her. You see it here in the armchair. Things are around her that she needs in the armchair, but also in the little bedroom where she often takes a nap in the afternoon. You see next to the bed you see a lamp, a reading lamp, and a CD and radio player, which she can turn on and off with a single button. You see a little bottle of water and her cup with her medication. You see her pillows again, her CDs and a headset. All things that she needs on a daily basis. And these things are organized such that they are ready to hand for her. They are ready to hand for her, first of all, physically, in the sense that they are easily accessible. She only has to stretch her hand when lying in the bed and she can reach the button to turn off the light. But they are also ready to hand for her cognitively, in the sense that she's familiar with them, she knows them because she uses them on a daily basis. They are cognitively ready to hand because they are where they belong, they are in the right spot, and also because they are positioned in a particular direction and distance from her body when she's lying in the bed or when she's sitting in the armchair. So she only has to stretch her hand and she can reach what she needs almost with her eyes closed. And this, for her, this ready-to-handness is a way to make life easier on her, especially when she's not feeling well. And in this sense, I think the little worlds that Mary creates give us as designers or as other people an insight in what is important in how her relation with the environment changes as a result of her dementia. So far for the coping strategies that she applies within the house, when we leave then the house and we go outside, we notice that the garden plays a very important role in her coping strategies. In the garden, Mary is able to calm down and she seems to have a very strong connection to it. In one of the poems, she calls the garden even a piece of herself. Also, although many things have disappeared from her life, she tells us that on the other hand, she has started to pay more attention to what she calls little things. A bird's nest or a flower, she can really appreciate the beauty of that. And therefore she spends ample time in the garden to observe nature's cycles and details, and she and her husband try to live as much as possible outside when temperature allows. So as soon as it's warm enough, it's not so often in Belgium, but as soon as it is, they have breakfast outside, they sit outside as much as possible. But interestingly, always when she sits outside, she needs some kind of cover. She told us that even in summer, when it's weather to wear a bikini, she wears a bikini, but she will always put a blanket over it. She doesn't want to sit outside unprotected. And at the time where Iris was able to visit Mary and her husband for the interviews, they were installing a new terrace in the garden with a seating area, a cover, even some heating, so that they can actually extend the time that they can sit outside, longer, also when it becomes a little bit chilly. And then, okay, we've started in the house, we moved to the garden. Now we move outside the garden, going outside, and about that, Mary tells us that she doesn't do that anymore unaccompanied because she's afraid of getting lost. And that was precisely also what was found in Lynne's study.
Thanks, Anne. When we first emailed each other, we weren't sure how we were going to do this joint presentation. We didn't know anything about each other. But in Anne's first email, she mentioned that Mary had made these coping strategies and adaptations, and we had found exactly the same thing in the research project that I'm going to be talking about. So it was a project we were doing on designing dementia-friendly neighbourhoods, which was a few years ago now, when we were at Oxford Brookes University. Quite a small project, only 20 people with dementia, We also interviewed carers, if they had carers, and we interviewed some people without dementia as a control group, just to see if the way they experienced the neighbourhoods was different. We also went on accompanied walks with our participants, and that we found that very useful, because often it didn't matter which group of interviewees we were talking to, they would often tell us in the interviews that they would address the local neighbourhood in one way, for example finding their way around, but actually when we were walking with them we found they were doing quite different things. And we also measured the local neighbourhoods. We walked around with maps and marked where certain characteristics of the neighbourhood were. So we found that participants with dementia, everything I'm talking about here is the participants with dementia, but it was often the same for the people without dementia. They did consciously use a number of coping strategies and adaptations. We found that none of our participants drove anymore, and they wouldn't go on a bus or a train unless they had somebody with them, for fear of getting lost, for fear of getting on the wrong bus, not getting off at the right stop. So they were very much restricted to the places they could walk to from their home. We also found that the participants with dementia would avoid particular destinations, for example churches or libraries, or even visiting friends. And I was interested to hear that Brian was saying that the people in the post office were relating how he always waited till the place was empty before he'd go up and ask to be served. And what we found from what people were telling us was that they were, sometimes they weren't always sure what was expected of them in certain places. They were also not sure whether they were actually allowed to be there. There seems to be difficulties understanding what's a private place and what's a public place, and we've been talking about these third spaces today. And again, they're never quite sure. They often cannot be quite sure whether they're actually allowed to be there, and they're very frightened of being told to go, or of not behaving quite in the way that they should do in those places. So we found that the people with dementia went to more informal, lively places that were more obviously open and public, where they could watch lots of activity without anybody really noticing them. They said that they felt more welcoming and safe. We also found that the people with dementia we spoke to tried to plan where they were going, and they tried to visualise the route before they set off from home, in the hope that they would be less likely to get lost. But they were no longer able to cope with maps or written directions, so they had to try and keep it in their heads, which for any of us it can be very difficult. They would also try to keep that in their minds as they're walking along, but any distractions could immediately cause problems, such as noises or heavy traffic or crowds. A couple of times I'd be walking along with one of the participants and we'd be absolutely fine, we'd know where we were going and which way we needed to go, and then somebody shouting or an ambulance siren going past, and that person would be completely disoriented and would have to ask me, where are we? I don't know where we are, I don't know where I'm going. Whereas just before that noise, they were absolutely fine. We also found that, especially in crowds, it seemed to be difficult to interpret the behaviour of the people around them, and they weren't always able to interpret sort of the direction the people were walking in, or how fast they were walking. So it wasn't always easy. When you're walking in crowds, without even thinking about it, you're sort of dodging around so that you never actually, or hardly ever, brush into people. But that appears to become harder for some people with dementia. Catherine talked about signs earlier, and sort of, as Catherine said, sort of we found that sort of straightforward signage with large realistic graphics that just gave important information, that wasn't ambiguous, that was clear. We also found that if they were on just single posts, single bits of information on a single post, the most useful. And I've got some examples of problem signs. I might come over here a bit. So signs like this, with small graphics, lots of stuff, all on one sign can be very difficult. And signs like these, our participants found very difficult to understand. They couldn't quite work out where they were going. The colour contrast in this one is quite difficult, yes. And so any signs where there's lots of information all stuck up together, they found very difficult. And do people know what this represents, this eye? Does anybody know? Information, yes, but even our participants without dementia struggled to tell us what that represented. So, most people think this is quite a common, understandable sign, but obviously not for many people. We were hoping that things like this would help. A fish hanging up outside a fish shop. But for our participants at least, they couldn't understand what that was referring to. They didn't get that at all. And with signs like this, for people with dementia and for people with vision impairments, they couldn't always understand that this was a bicycle. One person asked me if it was a pair of spectacles and why was that painted on the road. So it's making sure things are completely unambiguous and very clear. We found that our participants used landmarks all the time, and including the sort of most common landmarks that everybody uses, sort of churches, spires, towers. But we also found that places of interest and activity, they used an awful lot. As we were walking along, we'd say, oh, here's the children's playground. Now I know that I have to take the next right to get to the shops. So any places like that you wouldn't normally expect, we found were used a lot. We also found that they used other wayfinding cues, such as street furniture, like the red pillar boxes, red telephone boxes, trees, seating, things that are permanent. Obviously, they're not, if things are moved around, they're not going to help. But sort of permanent cues like that were used very much, as long as they were distinctive enough. And also we found that they had to be in familiar, understandable designs, and I've got some pictures of that on the next slide. And what we're not saying is that designs have to be old-fashioned, so that people who are old at the moment will understand them. It's more that they've got to be clear, they've got to be of a clear design, and let me show you some here. So Catherine was talking earlier about the importance of comfortable benches with backrests and armrests, but also this is a bench in a park in Barcelona, and apart from the awful paving, which I'm not talking about today, very few people in our research, we showed them lots of photographs and discussed the photographs with them. Very few people could recognise that as a bench, apart from the fact that it looks dreadfully uncomfortable. It's not a clear design. And with the telephone boxes, obviously this is now an old-fashioned design, but it's one that everybody recognises. Apart from that, it's got telephone written on it. Here, we've got all sorts of things going on. We've got information again, we've got an envelope, we have got a picture of a telephone, but internet written across. It's not so clearly a telephone box as this one. And again, toilets. Again, lots of our participants said that they wouldn't use toilets like this because they don't understand how they work. They'd be frightened that it would go wrong and the door might open when they're in there. But also, it wasn't always recognised as a toilet, although it does actually have toilet written on it. This is a case of sort of more traditional rather than modern, because this is what people recognise as public toilet. And for people with dementia, things like that are very important. So I've been talking a lot about distinctive wayfinding cues, and we found that if they were positioned at sort of important decision points, like at junctions, where somebody would have to decide whether to go straight on or left or right. If there was something like the letterbox or something equally as distinctive, it helped people understand where they were. Right, I'm on the street now, this is where I go left. And also on a long street where there wasn't much to look at, if there was an attractive tree or a piece of street furniture halfway along, that could also help. But in addition, we found that some of the people we spoke to had the insight to know that things were going to get worse. And yes, they might be able to get out and about now, but there might come a stage where places that are familiar to them at the moment may become less familiar. And we were surprised to find that quite a number of them are trying to fix it in their minds. And we did find that the more often the same route was taken, the easier it was for them to remember. So if they do the same route, if they go to the same shops every day, that's going to be something they hopefully will be able to do for a longer time. But they were trying to remember things, sort of, I need to cross 3 roads and then turn right to go to the post office. And there was one particular chap who knew that he'd got to his GP surgery because on the house opposite had different coloured tiles to the rest. And he was hoping that that would continue in his memory so that he would remember how to get there. And other features, like the ugly white house, we also had somebody say, oh, these houses look like toothpaste tubes, and then I know that I'm nearly there. Many things like that. They're consciously using.
Okay, so I think in both our studies it became clear that people with dementia, at least in the mild to moderate stages, that they do consciously develop strategies to cope both at home and when they go out. And the strategies that Mary developed, for instance, they inspired a group of architects, Belgian architects, in collaboration with UK architects. They inspired them to develop their design concept for a care campus for people with dementia. They were very much inspired by this notion of little worlds, and they actually developed their concept around little worlds that actually form a network, that are interconnected, so that a person with dementia can go out without leaving the safe environment of the care campus. Similarly, the findings of Lynne's study have been used by local authorities, designers and planners in the design of dementia-friendly neighborhoods, and therefore we think that when we discuss memory-friendly neighborhoods and how we can design them, that it's important to ask ourselves what can we learn from the strategies that people with dementia develop themselves. Thank you for your attention.
Okay, thanks, Anne and Lynne. We've got a couple of minutes for questions or comments. Okay, there are a few. I'll start here and then.
It was a really interesting